And we go here to Montreal for the next tape. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Jade Calvert. I'm a student here in Montreal at McGill University. As a leader, how do you envision the social makeup of our country over the next 30 years? Where do you stand on reasonable accommodation? Do you think that new immigrants to our country should adopt the social practices of Canadians who are already living here, or not?
Okay, Mr. Doucette.
A very good question. We have quite a debate in Quebec on that issue, and a commission named Taylor Bouchard. And the conclusion of that commission is that the multiculturalism system in Canada doesn't fit with Quebec, because we think that we have to integrate the immigrants, respecting them because they're modifying our society, and it's a plus. My grandfather was a home child. My mother's name Rolly, so I don't have any problem. When I go to Canada, a lot of times I say I'm a bloke who turned black, so I don't have anything against immigration. But the multiculturalism doesn't fit with Quebec. We're only 2% of francophones within North America, largely Hispanophone and Anglophone. We have to integrate the immigrants and build a society where a Quebecer is a Quebecer is a Quebecer without any exception.
Mr. Layton.
Well, thank you for the question, and I believe that we are going to have, Jade, continued waves of immigration here in Canada. We don't reproduce our own population sufficiently rapidly for us to grow our economy, and so we're going to be attracting people. And besides, who wouldn't want to come and live in this beautiful country of ours? I'm lucky enough to be in a family that came here from Hong Kong, and I got to marry Olivia as a result of that. Thank goodness we had the kind of policies that encouraged families to come here to Canada. One of the most disturbing aspects of what the Harper government is doing is that they're encouraging more and more people to come here as temporary foreign workers. They come here alone, they're not allowed to bring their family, and they work for up to 3 years for some company, and they send the money back home and then they go back home. And that's not how we built this country. I say family reunification is the key thing. And we now have families who have been applying to come here to bring their mother over to Canada, sometimes waiting 10, 12, 13 years. And they are unable to come here. There are cases where grandparents pass away before they can come and hold their grandchild. That is wrong. We need to put resources into encouraging those folks to be able to come here and be part of their family. And that would be a strong priority for a New Democrat government.
Well, one thing I should say, Mr. Layton, that I just can't accept is the will of that government to create 2 categories of refugees. We can't accept that. People coming here are coming because they have a lot of difficulties, political difficulties or economic difficulties in their countries. Sometimes it's a question of to stay alive or to die. And I saw those scandalous ads made by the Tories, a ship coming in Canada. It made me remember those boat people. They came in that kind of ship. And those people came, were fleeing from Vietnam and Cambodia. And now they're good Quebec citizens. This is a plus to the Quebec society. But when I see those kind of ads identifying those people like criminals, there's no other words for that. I just can't accept that. And I think that we have to oppose that. And if he's got a majority, then we'll have that kind of policy. 2 categories of refugees.
I believe that we will find if Mr. Harper hopefully won't have power after the next election, because I've seen these policies develop over the last number of years, and what we're seeing is more and more of this focus on the immigrant as some kind of an economic unit, so that we can squeeze as much out as we can. We don't give them the professional certification. They end up coming here. They're brought here with the inducement that perhaps with their professional credentials, training as doctors and professionals of all kinds, that perhaps they'd be able to find that kind of work here. And they come here and the door is slammed in their face. And New Democrats have been pushing hard for measures to be taken. And one of the most important measures is to create an opportunity for one of those well-trained workers to work in a mentorship context with some Canadian worker who's and professional who's already working in that area, so that they can get that Canadian experience. And that's got to be one of the top priorities. And by the way, that would also make sure that we would have a lot more doctors and medical professionals very quickly available to the 5 million Canadians that don't have medical care right now from a family doctor.
Mr. Layton, since you recognize that Quebec is a nation, then I ask you, will you then give Quebec full power over immigration and also the right to have its own policy concerning integration of the immigrants? Since the Bouchard-Taylor Commission was very clear, multiculturalism doesn't fit with Quebec's interests and Quebec's future. Would you agree that Quebec should have the right to determine its own policy and have full power over immigration, since we're a nation?
Of course, Quebec right now has very extensive control over its own immigration, and that's important because if we talk about Quebec, I was born and raised in Quebec, and here is a wonderful part of our country where the French language is the language of work, and it's the language of culture. And that's why the NDP put forward legislation so that could happen.
So you would agree that Bill 101 applied to all workers in Quebec?
And we have
Bill 101 applied to all workers.
And we have proposed that in the House for all federally regulated.
So Bill 101.
Thomas Mulcair, yes, has made exactly that proposal.
But I want to hear you. Do you agree that Bill 101 should apply to all economic sectors in Quebec?
Well, and we're taking action on precisely that.
So you're proposing that Bill 101 will apply?
We have said that those kind of that kind of framework should apply, for example, to workers in
I'm not talking about that kind of framework. I'm talking very precisely about Bill 101. Should it apply to all economic sectors? Because it doesn't apply to telecommunication, transportation, and the bank.
Mr. Giuseppe, you know that we have put legislation before the House of Commons to do exactly what you've asked.
No.
Yes,
No.
Yes, it does.
Gentlemen, if I may, let me jump in here.
We've got to rule that.
That's the 6 minutes for the 101.
That way we can preserve the French language in Quebec, which is very, very important.
Okay, we broadened it out to all 4 leaders now. Mr. Ignatieff, then Mr. Harper.
I want to get back to Jade's very important question. My dad came to Canada as an immigrant from Russia, and they arrived in Quebec. And the key, I think, to successful integration is mastery of the language. It's absolutely key that newcomers to our country, ils ont la maîtrise de la langue, Monsieur Duceppe. Je crois que ça, c'est le clé. That's the key, language integration. Well, one of the problems we've got here is that this government, the Harper government, has cut settlement funding, cut language instruction. The key to taking newcomers and making them good citizens, sharing our values, is giving them the mastery of the language. In Quebec, it's going to be the French language. In other parts of the country, it's going to be the other official language. And this government has cut settlement funding. So we've broken up the process by which we take newcomers and turn them into proud citizens. And the key to the future of a multicultural society, to get to Jade's point, is equality of rights, equality of opportunity under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If we stick to those principles, we'll continue to be a model and example to the world.
Mr. Harper.
Well, I should just respond briefly to Mr. Ignatieff's assertion. Of course, this government has tripled settlement funding with a higher emphasis on language because it is so important. But let me just answer the original question, which was on multiculturalism, because I think it's important. We favor multiculturalism. And what Canadians need to understand, what we understand about multiculturalism, is that people who make the hard decision to leave countries where they've been established for centuries or millennia and come here, they first and foremost want to belong to this country. That's why they come. That's why they're here. They also, at the same time, will change our country. And we show through multiculturalism our willingness to accommodate their differences, but so they're more comfortable. That's why we're so successful integrating people as a country. I think we're probably the most successful country in the world in that regard. Now, one issue that was raised was foreign credentials. In our budget is an important measure to give loans to new Canadians so they can get their foreign credentials when they simply can't afford to take a course. That's something Parliament should have been doing instead of having this unnecessary election.
Jack Layton.
Well, first of all, that was a completely inadequate program, but maybe this debate will produce a much better one coming out of it. But why did you cut the immigrant settlement services? These are services that helped immigrants who arrived here to make their way and had, in some cases, many decades of a record of service, very effective service here in Canada. And yet your government came in and essentially created a situation where immigrants arrive and they just haven't got the support to do what you've rather piously said you think ought to be happening.
Well, Mr. Layton, that's simply not true. Settlement funding support has tripled under this government.
And we've also maintained, we're the first government to maintain a vigorous and strong and open-door immigration policy during a recession, because we're focused on the long-term interests of Canada and the Canadian economy.
Why so many temporary foreign workers?
Simply are not true. Well, look, the reason for that is
we've got more of them coming in than immigrants now.
We have people coming who have jobs waiting for them. They almost invariably settle here. You know, the NDP government in Manitoba wants us to bring people specifically to fill jobs. That's why we're making some of this reorientation of the program, to make sure immigrants have work. It helps them adjust. It helps them become productive. It benefits everybody.
Mr.
I don't know why
Ignatius.
anyone would be against that, and even your
Michael Ignatius, sir.
colleagues are not against it.
My dad came here with his mom and his brothers. He came here as a family class immigrant. I sometimes worry, and if you'd been in power then, I don't think you would have got in. I mean, we got to get the balance back. Family class immigration is crucial because families look after each other and stick to each other and help each other to succeed. If you put too much emphasis on temporary foreign workers, we'll get the balance right. Integration will be more difficult. I mean, and then we back up family reunification visas, so you got Canadian citizens saying, I can't get my mom and dad over here. And that's what you've been doing. You've been reducing family reunification, and that's creating basically deep unfairness and deep resentment on all the new Canadians that I meet.
Mr. Ignatius, I know that you and the NDP have been saying that, but that's simply not true. We've been increasing categories across the board. In terms of family class, there will be as many family class admitted this year as in the previous year. That's the government's plan. That's how we keep a strong system of immigration. I know that you think you can score some points making these kinds of arguments, but they're simply not true. And we will continue to make sure we have a strong policy that accepts immigrants for a wide variety of reasons, but particularly ensures that they're able to contribute all they can contribute to our economy and be as successful as they can be.
I think it is very clear, and since it was recognized that Quebec is a nation, and we're only 2% of the feet in North America, that people coming to Quebec has to integrate themselves in French, which is the public common language. So I just don't understand why you oppose, Mr. Harper and Mr. Ignatius, that Bill 101, the French language, be the language of work for the economic sectors relying on the federal code, labor code, which are the banks, telecommunication, transportation, all those three sectors, 300,000 people, a lot of women among them. I just don't understand why it doesn't. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do so.
Well, Mr. D'Estape, I can answer the question. We have, as we've said as a government many times, we respect the division of powers in our federal constitution. It gives the federal government some powers over the labor area, gives the Quebec government other powers over the labor area. We have important constitutional responsibilities to the two national languages of this country, and in our area of jurisdiction, we respect that. We don't interfere with Quebec's jurisdiction over Bill 101. But let me just also question what you keep saying, that somehow multiculturalism is incompatible with being a Quebecer. You know, there's lots of people in this country who speak English who don't come from an English or a British background. One can retain their culture and their cultural identity and still integrate into the mainstream language of the community, which is French in Quebec and English in most of the rest of the country. And that's what we do, and that's why we support these policies.
But what we're saying on that, we had a commission working on that, and it's not because we don't want those people to enrich our culture. Obviously, we want that, but we don't want to create ghettos. And you think when you're coming in Quebec, you have to integrate to the Quebec society, and the model of multiculturalism is in bankruptcy in Great Britain, as an example, and it is contested in a lot of places. That doesn't mean that you don't want the immigrants to come and to bring their own values and part of their culture. But you have to reply here.
Gentlemen, quick reply here, then the other two. Creating ghettos. It is the most successful integration policy in the world. It helps Canadians retain their culture while being part of the broader community. That's what we're so proud of. I know the Bloc Québécois wants to break up the country, and you don't think new Canadians are going to support that objective. That's fine.
No, but this is not the case at all. Gentlemen, this is not the case at all.
Jack Layton's turn, please.
Well, I have to come back to the issue that's on the minds of most of the families that we're talking about here, which is how they can bring their family members to join them here. And how can we regard it as somehow acceptable that a family has to wait for 10 years for their mother or father to come and join them? I mean, that is just so wrong. I think of Olivia's mother, who lives with us, has lived with us for 20 years. Thank goodness she wasn't applying to come here now, because she might never have got to see my granddaughter. That's just simply wrong, and it's tearing families apart. Why don't we make a commitment, all of the parties together, to say that that's going to get fixed, and we're going to make sure that every family member that wants to be here as part of a loving family and building this country through that kind of love and community building, that we're going to make that a top priority. I tell you, the New Democrats will do that.
Well, first of all, Mr. Layton, when we took government, it's well known that there were backlogs of hundreds of thousands of files in every single category of immigration. We've been working to bring those down. We're admitting record numbers of people. That's what we're going to continue to do. The fact of the matter will be there will always be far more people willing to come to Canada than we can admit in any year. But we're going to keep making sure we admit as many as we can because our economy needs it, our society needs it, and we're all better off for it, and that applies just as strongly to family class as any other class.
I want to get to something back to the original question that Jade asked, which is about multiculturalism and how we see the future of our country as a multicultural society. I think the key thing is we got to take the politics out of multiculturalism here somehow. Minister Kenney, your Minister of Immigration, has been segmenting the country into ethnic and very ethnic. It causes enormous resentment among Canadians. Newcomers to our country who become citizens, the thing they most want to be treated as is a Canadian. A Canadian is a Canadian. We're going to have a great future as a multicultural country if we work on that basis. Equality of rights, equality of responsibilities, competence in the two official languages. That's the ground that will create a stable multicultural society. But if we start micro-targeting communities and putting one community against another, the way Minister Kennedy's been doing, that's going to break up a multicultural society.
Well, I've made it my objective since we formed the new Party of Canada to make sure our party is present in all cultural communities of this country. That's what Minister Kenney and so many other of our members have been doing. It has been successful. More and more new Canadians are voting for our party. Obviously, encourage them to do so. I think there are a lot of small C conservatives out there who should become big C conservatives, but we respect their choices, and we respect the right of every party, Liberal, New Democrat, every party, to go out and try and get Canadians, no matter what their different ethnic background. That's what we're doing. That's what we should.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. That is the end of that segment. We now go to question 5. This is the justice system. This segment will feature Michael Ignatieff having the first reply, Gilles Duceppe having the second reply. Let's look at the tape now from Gibsons, British Columbia. Roll tape.
Hi, my name's Len Gold. I'm a resident of Gibsons, BC, and my concern is safety for people in this country, being able to walk down the streets at night and being safe in their homes. And I'd like to know what the government plans on doing, dealing with the criminals and the light sentences being handed down to them by the courts.
Mr. Ignatieff, you're up first.
Well, Len, you're a lucky man if you live in Gibsons, BC. First of all, here's what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't import failed criminal justice policies from the United States. Mega prisons, mandatory minimums have failed in the United States. This is Canada. We have to have a criminal justice policy that's right for Canada. One of the things, if we're going to be tough on crime, we got to be tough on guns. The Harper government wants to gut the gun registry. This will reduce public safety. We need to invest in crime prevention. In the Lower Mainland, gang violence is a huge problem, and that may be what our friend from British Columbia is worried about. We have to give the police the tools to get tough on these drug-related gangs and lock them up where we need to. But the key thing here is we've got to learn from the failures of American criminal justice policy and get tough on guns, invest in crime prevention, and provide better victim services. That's being smart at crime, and that would be our approach.
Monsieur Duceppe.
Yes, I think that this government made a lot of demagoguery on the question of being tough on crime. They're saying they're tough on crime, but Mr. Harper is very soft on crime in his own office. I would say that when we look at the criminal rate, it is declining. the American model imported in Canada would be an important area. We would just can't accept that. And it seems their philosophy is more guns and big prisons. And I think this is a very dangerous social cocktail. We have, on the other hand, to be responsible. And when I look at what the Bloc did in the past with the anti-gang law, the early release was stopped at 1/6 of the sentence, and he refused that twice. This is why Vincent Lacroix went out of prison. And we proposed those things, and I think that was responsible. But trying to eliminate the gun registry, I think, is an error that will affect all the Canadian and the Quebec societies. Policemen are saying so. Almost everybody in Quebec is saying so.
Mr. Ignatieff.
Well, one of the places, when I talk about let's make criminal justice policy in Canada, one of the places we can learn from is Quebec's policy on young offenders, what you call the jeunes contrevenants. I mean, that's the kind of emphasis on rehabilitation for young offenders that we need. We've got to get balance in our justice policy. When people commit criminal violence, crimes of violence against individuals, they've got to do time. There have got to be consequences for actions that threaten public safety. But we've got to give the police resources. We've got to maintain an integral gun registry. We've got to work on rehabilitation for young offenders. I mean, it's not an unimportant fact that so many people in our prisons haven't even finished high school. We've got to think about what that means. Invest in education. Make sure people get on the right path before they go off the wrong. This is the kind of balanced policy that we haven't seen from the Harper government.
Yes, but when you're talking about the young offenders, I remember that the first party to modify that law was the Liberal Party, and you supported it. The NDP was also supported that. I think that was an error denounced by the National Assembly in Quebec, and I think our system in Quebec is good. There's a good rate of rehabilitation in Quebec. But one thing I'm very worried about is that Mr. Harper said that he won't come back on abortion, neither on capital punishment. But we all know the tactic they use. They don't come with a proposal made by the government, but one of their members is coming with a private member bill, and then supported by most of the Tories, if not all of them. So it is one of the danger if that party is in majority in the House of Commons, that they will use the same tactic. We don't want to talk about that, but one of the members will come, and then we'll see. They will try to make the abortion illegal, and it could be the same thing with the not illegal, but for the capital punishment to reinstate that.
Well, again, I think what Mr. Duceppe is referring to is also the politics of fear here. Crime is always a serious problem. When you've been hit or knocked over, or had your purse stolen, or victim of personal assault, it matters to you, and you want consequences. But you've also got to understand that crime in our country is not increasing. The politics of fear is designed to exploit and create fear. Mr. Harper specializes in the politics of fear on the crime agenda. And we need a balanced policy that's based on evidence, not ideology. This is the man who, tried to take apart the long-form census because he doesn't like facts that disagree with his ideology. We need criminal justice policy that's based on the facts as we see them. Tough on crime, or we need tougher sentences. Rehabilitation, crime prevention, much more investment in crime prevention, and more victim services, a balanced approach to this problem.
Okay, that's the end of the one-on-one. You seem to be a feature of the one-on-one there, so why don't I give you the first shot at it?
Let me respond to that. And to Len's question. I mean, Len is right in saying, well, Canadians support and do want a very balanced system when it comes to criminal justice. That balance has been tilted. Rehabilitation is important, but it's also important that the punishment fit the crime. We've had important bills before Parliament for years that until very recently the other parties said they supported. They obviously don't. We have bills to have mandatory penalties for gangs that involve organized drug crime, for sexual predators. We want to repeal the situation where serious criminals can get pardons automatically. We want to be able to give store owners like David Chen the right to defend themselves without being charged. These are bills that are sitting before Parliament that Parliament will not pass. I'm hoping when a re-elected Conservative government gets back What we'll do in the first 100 days is we'll package these bills together and get them passed, because this is what Canadians expect us to do. They expect us to take crime seriously and have punishments that fit the crime. Jack Layton.
Well, I'm glad that you're supporting the legislation we proposed around David Chen and that sort of situation, small business owner in downtown Toronto. But I think the problem here is that you haven't fulfilled many of your commitments. You promised that there would be 2,500 more police officers for community policing, but that promise was simply not kept. And policing is very important if we're going to reduce crime levels that Len was talking about. Similarly, we do need some prosecution in certain key areas. We'd like to see carjacking and home invasions and the recruiting of a young person into a gang to be an offense. But most of all, we've got to focus on prevention in the first place. You've got to prevent the crimes from taking place if ultimately you're going to reduce crime levels the way we all want to. And that means strong support for programs for young people all over the country. Because if we give young people a positive choice when it comes to what they're doing after school, for example, so that when some troublemaker comes up and tries to tempt them into that life of crime with the bling and everything else that goes along with it, that they've instead got something very, very positive to do. And all over this country, there are people working so hard on these kind of programs, it's fantastic. And not all of them can manage to access these programs through tax credits and that kind of thing. We've got to be supporting particularly those vulnerable neighborhoods, and we have, that's been a hashtag fail on this issue.
Mr. Ignatieff.
When Mr. Harper says, if he gets another government in the first 100 days, we're going to have some giant omnibus crime bill, I don't know about you, but it gives me the shivers. We've got to have balance in criminal justice, and we're not going to get it from the Harper government. I met a young boy in Winnipeg, just speaking of what Mr. Layton said, who was poised between falling back into a gang or finishing high school. That's the critical pivot moment in crime prevention strategy. If you can get that kid through high school with incentives so that if he gets a learning passport so he can go to college or university, you may save him from falling back into a gang. If we're serious about crime, we've got to think about that young person and get the pivot right so he makes the right choice instead of the wrong choice. You can lock people up forever in prisons, but I worked in prison when I was a young graduate student. I worked with lifers. I'm utterly unsentimental about criminals. But the one thing I know about prison is prison makes almost everybody worse who's in there. And that's what we've learned from the United States. You keep building mega prisons, you keep slapping people in there forever in the slammer with mandatory minimums, you're going to end up with more crime problems, not less. We got to get a joined up adult strategy based on real evidence, and that's what we haven't had from the Harper government.
Mr. Harper. Well, we're making investments in youth crime prevention programs. In fact, there were renewal of those very programs in the budget we just tabled before Parliament, and yet all the opposition parties decided to combine and force an unnecessary election instead. I hope we get re-elected. We're able to pass those important initiatives because they have been effective programs, but none of that relieves us of our responsibility to make sure that punishment fits the crime. As Len says, that is simply not the case in too many instances in government today. We've put forward measures before Parliament to deal with those. Canadians have long said we want those passed. We will make sure they do get passed.
Monsieur Doucette.
The problem with your attitude is instead of debating and adding experts coming to the committees, explaining their point of view, and taking the time to change things, some of the things have to be changed. But you're trying to put everything in the same bill. Just like the sixth of the sentence, that could have been done a lot before. You were refusing just for political reason, not to give us the credit of having proposing it. I think this is not the attitude, how to work and face those huge challenges of living and having in a society and having the liberty and at the same time justice. At the same time punishing those who deserve to be punished and respecting those who are the victims. And you mixed everything with a philosophy, it's your way or no way. That's the problem. You're not consulting people, you don't want to debate those things. This is always a problem.
Not true. On the very measure you raised, there was a Conservative bill before the House to end that practice. There was a block bill before the House. We sat down, we negotiated something we could both live with. Obviously, I wanted something that would have been stronger, but nevertheless, what we did is we ended the practice. And Canadians have to understand this. We ended a practice where a huge
A year too late.
number of offenders served 1/6 of their sentence, and they were automatically released from prison after 1/6. And yet the Liberals and NDP oppose that legislation. This is the kind of lack of balance in our system that we have to correct.
But Mr. Harper,
Jack Layton's turn.
Mr. Harper.
Jack Layton, please. Jack Layton.